Hello, welcome to the moon bath, where we chat underneath the digital moonlight and talk about what's on our screens. How's it going? So today I'm gonna take a look at my social feed, and we're gonna just scroll down on the Bluesky and then talk about different topics, basically what's been going on, and then we're gonna get into what I've been watching on the screen, the living room screen, really, because there's multiple screens. We got their phone screens, we got your TV screens, we got your theater screens. That's what this channel's about. All right, let's get to it. It's gonna be a mix of depressing stuff and also some art and some maybe hopeful things as well. That's what social media is these days as we scroll, right? It's a mishmash of all that. It's kind of how we look at the world these days. All right, so let's check out what I've been seeing, what's been on my screen. We did, if this interests you, this is last week we did that. We talked about heated rivalry and all this. But since then, the war in Iran continues. Let's not forget that it's not about liberation. It's not about the civil rights of anybody. This war is about capital, as J.P. Morgan says, that the Iran conflict is a buying opportunity, not a reason to sell stocks. Buy, as in B-U-Y, also B-Y-A-E to all the unfortunate victims of imperialism. Meanwhile, in the States, the DHS admits that it has deported more than 80 DACA recipients, Dreamers, of course. As Sadet says here, they organized for Dreamers to the point that they were slamming shots at work. All these people just want to live. The only people I will hate more are the ones who told them I was overreacting. I had to wait for zeitgeist. Well, ICE continues, and we're going to get into it a little more. Again, top 1% in America now hoard 55.8 trillion, more than the GDP of the United States and China combined. Wealth distribution, folks, it's out of whack. We're going to talk about Hind Rajab in a bit after we get through all this. The U.S. war on Iran is estimated to have already cost taxpayers over $2 billion. As Tupac says, they got money for wars, but can't feed the poor. We could use that money. We could use that all those billions to, for social benefits. You might call it socialism instead of imperialism. Ilhan Omar is the GOAT. In terms of what's going on with the Supreme Court, they keep the conservative Supreme Court continues to strip away our rights. Now they deny trans kids rights to privacy in California. So basically, they can be outed to their parents. Basically, if a kid is going through trans, is a trans kid and is maybe talking to their counselor or somebody, they don't have privacy anymore for that, and that could lead to a lot of issues at home, because there's a lot of transphobic, homophobic, bigoted parents out there. Could lead to abuse, could lead to mental, physical, and some even disown their kids. It's just part of a whole huge problem going on now with anti-trans laws. But you don't have to comply. You gotta remember, we don't have to comply to all this. Yeah, there's risk involved. It's part of the civil disobedience way of doing things. You might have heard of MLK, but we can apply that to a bunch of encroachments on our rights in a variety of ways. The Prospect has listed here a running count of how many people ICE has killed and injured. 28 people. It might be a little higher now since 4 days ago, but 48 people in custody. That's all. What's they know of? There's still some unknowns out there, and as we'll get into in a second, new footage pops up, new reports pop up of things that happened in the past, a few months ago. So this is just a small estimate of what's really happening. But life goes on, and we have to perhaps. I know this is a big, this is a big swerve here, but I think it's also important to try to stay hopeful and celebrate people who have the privilege to celebrate and enjoy life and not get stuck in the doom scroll. And this particular post by Jizzly could be something I get into more later in regards to expressing ourselves sexually in the arts. But it's good to see that there are pockets in the world where there is a little bit of freedom here and there we can celebrate, like the Hump Film Festival, that basically is a festival for erotic works in film. Let's celebrate freedom of sexual expression and uncensored film while we still can. And because, I feel like the discourse in sex and in media is, by the way, this is all safe for work. It's very suggestive, but there's no sexy, explicit imagery in this little clip here. Suggestive, but there's a big conversation to be had about this. But I think that there is room for expressing ourselves sexually, erotically in film. And I think festivals like this, advocates like Jizzly, others are expressing, themselves in a way that is also contrary to the mainstream patriarchal view of sex, whether it's in mainstream porn or mainstream media. So I think that's also important to be aware of. And share cute art like this too, cute little voluptuous fairies and stuff, while we distract ourselves sometimes when we don't want to be bombarded with all the bad news. You got to have some levity every now and then. The thing about this war that's happening, this war on humanity that's been going on forever and has escalated visibly through social media these days because of the Trump administration, the head of the imperial core in the world. There's so much going on. We have the war in Iran, but it feels like to me they're also they kidnapped the Venezuelan president, of course. They got continued harsher sanctions on Cuba. Now they're working with Ecuador, and a Cuban ambassador has been ordered to leave. And the Trump administration has sent in troops to Ecuador to combat the cartels there. Basically, they're projecting their dominance even more so in the world with their military, and continuing this show of strength, which leads to destabilization. Of course, it's all about empowering the U.S. government, not the people they're invading, of course, and also for the benefit of capital, the capitalist class, in regards to seizing resources to enrich such oil companies, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just a continuation of that. It's also like there's doing so much of it, whether it's Ecuador, whether it's Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, elsewhere. It kind of almost like makes me think that like what they're doing is like they feel like the fascists in charge right now are maybe thinking like, oh, maybe we don't have that much time to do all this stuff, because if the Trump decides not to hold on to power, and we have a new president in 2028, 2029, then they feel like, oh, we got to hurry up and do as much harm as we can, as much power grabbing as we can before then. So maybe that's what it kind of feels like they're doing so much, and they're like, it's hard to keep track of everything. And it's also kind of maybe the continuing of the overall status quo, where like, which is something I've been thinking about for a while, is that just that the Republican Party is almost like, you know, is the far right party of the U.S. government, while the Democrats are the center left, really more just moderates. And so the Democrats are kind of acting like, you know, the soft version of fascism, and the Republicans are acting as the increasingly the you know, the extreme version of fascism, or the overt fascism. And it just goes back like every 4 or 8 years, back and forth, you know, while the Republicans are advancing further into fascism, the Democrats are kind of like simmering it down a little bit, just to keep it under control, you know, and to make it look like, oh, look, we're doing stuff where we're not that as bad as the Republicans. But they're the two party system is they all serve the same class, the corporate class, you know, who are now represented by the big tech AI companies. Mostly they're the richest ones right now. NVIDIA, OpenAI, all those evil companies. And you know, they're helping out with the military. Okay, again, it's all capital. According to this article, the U.S. military used the most advanced AI in warfare yet to strike Iran. And last week we talked about the whole Anthropic thing. Anthropic is an AI company, and they've been bickering with the U.S. government over the use of their technology in warfare and elsewhere. And I think now OpenAI has a contract with the government, but also Anthropic still does. But basically, like the whole thing was that Anthropic didn't want to use, supposedly, they didn't want the government to use their technology for automated AI weaponry to, you know, basically, you know, for the military to use the technology to launch weaponry without human interaction, really just letting the AI decide what targets to target and stuff. And now, of course, that's so many ethical quandaries there. And supposedly Anthropic opposed it. From my understanding, there's like a good video about it. Taylor Renz did it recently, talked about it. That Anthropic like thinks it's not ready yet. Like the AI systems aren't ready to be fully automated, but they're not necessarily opposed to it. You know, so they're just kind of doing it. It's like a PR move. They're like, oh, like we're the ethical AI company, you know, we have limitations, you know. So that's their whole thing, you know. They're competing with OpenAI, you know, and they take digs at OpenAI. There's like Super Bowl commercials, you know, where they take digs at they make fun of OpenAI or whatever for not being you know, they don't have ads on their chatbot or whatever. But they're all, you know, it's just like Coke and Pepsi. It's just, they're all the same thing, really. And apparently they use Anthropic. See, look, says Anthropic Clouds partnered with military's Maven Smart system. So even though they were bickering and they were like, and Hegseth was considering Anthropic like a national security threat or whatever, like end of the day, you know, they're still using it because they think it's the best one or whatever. And was that the reason why they bombed the schoolgirls? 170 or so school children were killed on the first day of the war because of this AI thing. So just stop using AI, people. You got to stop using AI because we don't want to normalize it the more than it already is. And it's all connected. You know, Anthropic, you know, there's chatbots. People use that instead of Google search, and Google search now has AI overviews. And what you got to do is you got to look it up, but you can disable AI on the Google search. You can disable a bunch of things with different add-ons and extensions to your browser. I use Firefox. Firefox, of course, is you know, not perfect. There's probably other ones that are better, but it's better than Google Chrome. And now recently Firefox allows you to turn off AI because they have a bunch of options there. But anyways, the point is you can get around it. You don't have to do it, and you know it takes a little bit of effort to, like, you know, add these extensions and maneuver around because all the tech companies are forcing these AI stuff on you. But I believe in you. I think you can do it, you know, because we don't want to. If less people use it, it will become less of an incentive for them to keep pushing it on us, right? Oh boy, there's so much stuff going on. I haven't played Disco. I mean, I played Disco Elysium. This is from Disco Elysium, this character. But I didn't finish it, and I do mean to get back to it because it's like the most Marxist game there is, probably. But in terms of it's a really well told story. But there's like interesting artwork, and I just thought it was fun because she says, "It would be unfaithful to turn my back on the union." That's right. We got to unionize people. Make sure you to start a union if you haven't already at your workplace, or and support them if they, you know, that's the first step into making bringing democracy to the workplace and building cooperatives and eventually ending the mode of production that gives all the power to the capitalist bourgeois class. You know, I don't know. You probably can tell that I'm still reading my political theory, and by this time next year, I'll probably have read all the political theory, most of the important parts, the important ones. Anyways, so she's gone. She's fired. You know, they're replacing her Nomi, what's her name? Gnome, with some other person, Mark Wayne Mullen, who likes to pick other people's noses. I don't know. I saw a tweet somewhere where he picked someone else's nose. I don't know. It was weird and stupid, but Peggy says, Minnesotans won't forget what you did to our neighbors. We will continue to fight for you to be held accountable. She's just a stooge. There's others that are going to replace her. AOC is standing up against age verification. That's something nice to see, you know. I feel like she's becoming a little bit even more radicalized to the left than before. We'll see how she develops. So I've been on YouTube as usual, and I've been getting recommended videos by Professor Zhang. And this guy, he's like a professor who posts his lectures on YouTube, and he talks about theory. He's big into game theory, and so he became popular because recently he predicted that Trump would go to war with Iran, you know, and such. And so he goes into like all these analysis and speculation really about how the world works and how it evolved and how potentially he can predict what's going to happen in the geopolitics of the world. He references Asimov's theory of like, what is it called? History, something, predictive history or something. But he's getting a lot of traction. But the thing is that, like, someone said that, I read a comment, it was like, oh, his narratives are interesting and well told, his videos, but as soon as he talks about something you're familiar with, you realize that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So yeah, I think we gotta be wary. He's been getting a lot of views, and Andrewism put out a video recently about it, but yeah, like I saw his videos on Marx and communism, and he seems to interpret it like other conservatives, and he seems to be like he has certain views that are more left and some are more right, but he does tend to veer into conspiratorial thinking, and in regards to Marx's theories, he overemphasizes the impact of religion on history, which is interesting perspective, but I think he doesn't consider material conditions as much as he should on how they shape history. And in his interpretation, like for example, his interpretation on Marx, like a lot of conservatives critique Marxist communists for saying that, they want to abolish private property, but they fail to distinguish the difference between private property and personal property. Private property is property that is used to accumulate capital used by the capitalist class, by owning the modes of production, owning the means of production, and exploiting the working class. And then there's a portion he mentioned, like, oh look, Marx wants to take your property basically and abolish all inheritance, and but he fails to like understand that some of those tenets in the Communist Manifesto are basically things that like a society should do in their transition from capitalism to socialism. So like the idea of abolishing inheritance is really to redistribute that wealth, the large inheritance that all the rich get from their families, etc., and put it back into the public, and and equalize everything. But and then in another document that Engels and Marx wrote, there's actually another document, Demands by the Communist Party of Germany, something like that, and they list out more, like they go into more detail, I think, or they just list it out in bigger tenets they want, and there they say limits to inheritance, not completely abolish it. So, and then if we look into what the Soviet Union did, they didn't completely abolish inheritance, because basically they lay it out more specifically, where like they allowed families to keep their homes, etc., and they debated and wrote and figured out that like it's mostly about taking the private property, the capitalist property, away from the bourgeois class, and making it, giving it to the workers, and to be more of a social thing. And so and they even like, there was even a thing where like it's basically it was also about like keeping what you earned, like it's not like they didn't like take away your family's savings or anything, but it's something you have to read more into. But like, again, he has like a shallow reading of it, so, which is, I think, a lot of people, and it's kind of understandable too, like because a lot of the text, Marxist, communist text, Lenin, whatever, like tends to be a little bit more dense than what people are accustomed to. But in reality, it's not that hard to grasp. And then you can also, like, after reading it, you can, which is what I do, is like I like to go on YouTube and read and see other people's interpretations and analysis of it, you know, to get a better understanding. But the more you read it, the more you'll understand it. And, you know, but again, like, if you're just watching his stuff, you just get a shallow understanding of it. And he goes through a lot of history too, so it's like, you know, it kind of makes sense that, like, he's not really focused on one particular subject. He's focused on, like, he's trying to talk about so many things that it's hard to, like, get any specific details or really education of any specific time or period from his lectures, because they're so broad. But anyways, I don't really am interested in watching his videos anymore, but check out Andrewism for more of his thoughts. He's an anarchist, by the way, Andrewism. Okay, so a left anarchist, of course, which, you know, I feel like I consider myself a socialist, communist, a sort of commie. I'm still figuring it all out, but in general, I'm for a future that is moneyless, stateless, classless, which I think has a lot of similarities to what anarchists want. So a lot of anarchists are communists as well. But in order to get there, that's the issue. How do we get there, you know? And I feel like a socialist state, I think, is probably the best way to get there. Anarchists will think we need to skip that process and go directly towards communism. Anyways, read up on it. And remember, folks, AI is for losers. Don't use it, you know. It enables the fascist, you know. It serves the capitalist, you know. This artwork says, I can make art that's ugly and bad all by myself. Thank you very much. Yep. And remember, there's happiness out there still. Like these two folks, you know. I understand that seeing someone naked walk down the sidewalk may be a little alarming, particularly in this patriarchal world where there's a lot of creeps out there. But if you're gonna do it, probably best to do it with a gay rainbow next to your side. A gay angel next to your side. Do it in a group, you know. There's this thing called, like, the naked bike ride. I participated in a long time ago. People just get on their bikes naked and they're just riding down the street. Can be pretty fun. But yeah, I just thought that was a wholesome image right there. That was fun, you know. And here's another wholesome image about kitties and tea. I'm more of a tea drinker. I like my tea. I'm not much of a coffee drinker. So this came out recently. The video footage of Ruben Ray Martinez getting shot and killed. It's not as, the camera's like further away. It's not as clear as Peretti or Nicole Good's murder. But this happened last year, right? I think was it in May or something of last year? But you know, this evidence came out now, you know, so we're gonna keep seeing more of that, more evidence come out over these next couple years as the evidence piles up, showcasing the cruelty of this fascist regime we're currently living in. March 15th, like a whole year ago, pretty much. And it's only now coming to light, the actual evidence. I think last week we got reports of this, but then the actual video evidence, you can look up the video, was released. But this person links to this article that basically since the inception of since Trump got into office, he's basically trying to get the ICE agents cleared of all charges. They want to protect ICE agents no matter what. That goes more into it. So that's the thing. That's why it took so long for this evidence to come out. And they're going to continue to do that. So there's been reports that Trump wants to send ground troops to Iran. There's been some reports that they're already doing that. If you have family members or anybody in the military, and please send them this link, Center on Consciousness. They're a great nonprofit, and they detail what you can do to file a report as a conscientious objector. Either resign from the military, just get a discharge, or a reassignment. You can call this number. And if you object to the war in Iran, going to the war, because of Israel, because of the imperial capitalist class, I had to send a link to an estranged family member myself. Like all, I'm sure a lot of us, we have certain sides of the family who maybe have different political views, or some people feel like their only option is to join the military to go to college and etc. This site has other opportunities, other options you can take. There's different, I went to community college with financial aid. Like, it's possible to go that route. There's different options. So that's a good resource. Today is International Women's Day. Let's not forget, we've got some detainees in these concentration camps still. This is a piece from Lakea Cordia. She writes from there, describing the horrific conditions. People are sick. They're not getting enough to eat. They're getting horribly treated there. Not knowing what their life's gonna be like, where they're gonna go. They're deported to countries or places where they have no family or home even. It's horrible stuff. They do find solidarity with each other. They laugh together. They cry together. She's been in detention for over a year, almost a year, I guess. Just for protesting against the Israel genocide in Palestine. Just for protesting, for the Palestinian people. And then I posted this little art piece from AO. I don't know if they're coining this new term, astravore, defined as a soul that continues to feed on hope and optimism despite disappointment or hardship. I think that describes a lot of us fighting for justice. A lot of people on the left trying to seek hope and try to be optimistic despite all this hardship we're going through. That's part of being on the left too, is that's just how it is. You continue to fight, and slowly we get some gains. Sometimes things go backwards, but the arc of history will flow to justice, right? I'm butchering that 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 quote. I think that's a Martin Luther King quote. But you get the idea. That was nice. Also a moon. I like moons, of course, with a little butterfly. Yeah, that was on Bluesky. I also have a Mastodon. There's some other links here. Palantir and other companies are filling up their workspaces with this nicotine packets to get workers hooked on nicotine to work more productively, efficiently, whatever. Despicable stuff. Palantir, of course, is a mass surveillance company. This is a cool little project. Rewrite women's roles in fairy tales and folk story. It's like a little board game or a little tabletop experience where you can rewrite fairy tales to focus on women in fairy tale folklore. It sounds pretty cool. It is International Women's Day. Just some fun memes. Congress is considering abolishing your rights to be anonymous online. Taylor Renz, of course, has a lot of good stuff. Check out their videos and I think they have a Substack. Anthropic is gonna Anthropic. Hegseth is ducking questions on who was responsible for bombing a school in the death of 180 children. Take some time to read, folks. Decide to do some self-care and read. Like this little picture here. Again, you're talking about Firefox again. Oh yeah, Firefox is working with Anthropic, by the way. Feed your oppressors to the land. Fertilize the land with your oppressors. That's what this art says. Right. Oh yeah, there's this thing about the previous founder of the Call of Duty games or whatever, or Activision, saying that like, oh, they don't want to support a propaganda in their games because like the U.S. was like, or the bosses at Activision wanted to do a mission or something or a story about how Israel was being attacked by Iran and stuff, and they thought that was too far crossing the line. But of course, their games are still propaganda for the West, you know, for American, even though it's like fictitious wars and stuff. But I guess they cross the line if it involves Israel and Iran, even though of course Israel is an ally to the U.S. and they have that one of their games was like featured Ronald Reagan as a prominent figure, and it wasn't very critical of Reagan at all. I mean, I don't know. I don't really play those games, but that's just an interesting article on Eurogamer about that. Yeah, here's a piece about just the horrible things the U.S. does. There was like a parade in India, like a military parade, and they took the opportunity, the U.S., to bomb an Iranian warship. You know, they were defenseless. It was just a military showing or a parade showing or something. And that was just a cowardly move that is I think is illegal in the Geneva Conventions to like bomb a ship like that and kill a bunch of people, just crew members and the military, just showcasing their ship in a parade, you know. This is a cute little picture. Here's the conscious objectors. Iranian women enjoying the new freedoms bestowed on them by the United States and Israel. Thanks. Happy Women's Day. So that is what's been going on my news feed. Let's get into what I've been watching. It's movie time, but it's gonna be related, because we're gonna talk about the Voice of Hind Rajab. Okay, 1 second here. Switching it up. I've been using the Donkey Kong Country underwater music as a backdrop. That's been safe to put on YouTube without any copyright restrictions. Let's switch it up to some other royalty music, royalty free music. Okay. Movie time. So I watched Voice of Hind Rajab. This is the story of Hind Rajab, a girl who was killed during the siege and genocide in Palestine. She was trapped in her car. In a car, her family was slaughtered by the IOF, the Israel Occupation Force. And while they were trying to escape the area, and she was calling to this hotline, this organization there that helps people or helps to coordinate rescues, right? So they call them this call center in the West Bank, and the Red Crescent volunteers, as they're called, and they coordinate to get ambulances out there to rescue them, right? The issue, of course, is that the ambulances have to coordinate with the military there, the Israeli military, or a part of it, to make sure there's a safe passage, you know. So that's the struggle in the movie that's done. It's pretty effective how it showcases that. It's a little bit maybe overly dramatized. But it showcases. It's interesting that it showcases. You know, this is a drama, the actors and stuff, but it mixes and matches real moments like the voice of Hind Rajab, with the dramatization. And so it's actually her real voice we hear. So it's pretty grueling to watch, you know. Last week we talked about Sarat and how that was pretty emotional. You know, there was death in that movie, but this, of course, is real. Like, the voice is real. It is about a real freaking conflict, a real genocide, and these are like the volunteers who are trying to assist on that, and their struggle with that. And so it's from their perspective, really, and so it kind of echoes almost how we view the war, right? As, you know, as people not in Palestine right now, through social media, through the news, etc. You know, at a distance, and then feeling helpless, you know, trying to do the best we can. And so it effectively tells that story of the complications of trying to coordinate, trying to make sure the ambulance doesn't get bombed in the process of trying to rescue people. And then hearing the actual voice of this young girl is just, it's horror. It's terrific, you know. So it's hard to hold in your tears while you watch this. But this movie is kind of like brings up the question of like what the limits of cinema, really, in terms of addressing an ongoing atrocity in the world. You know, this in part as other, you know, as articles, as reporting, other media regarding ongoing conflicts, what it does is it brings awareness, right, to what's going on. But at certain points, it could feel like maybe a little bit exploitative. At certain points, it could feel like most everybody is fully aware what's going on. What else can it do? Like, are the proceeds of this film are the people behind the financing this film, are they contributing in a more substantial way to ending the occupation? Or, what are they just using this as a way, as a sort of like signaling that they're virtuous or something, right? Or is this a process, an emotional cathartic process for the filmmakers, maybe, but at this point, what is it accomplishing besides bringing a little bit more awareness to the issue? Now, this story is actually a story that I remember hearing about it, but it kind of got brushed away, and like, I didn't quite know the full context of this. Like the thing is that also, like, when the ambulance got there, they got the clear. So I'm going to spoil a little bit of it. Basically, I'm spoiling reality, so I don't think that's much of a thing. But basically, they send the ambulance, right? They get the clear. They get the green light to send the ambulance eventually. And the whole thing is treated like almost like a heist or something. Like they're waiting for the right moment. They're like, it's super dramatized. But they get the green light. And then the Israeli forces shoot them, and basically, the ambulance dies as well. So like, it's, Hind Rajab ends up dying as well. So it's a super tragic story. And so like, what was I gonna say with that? So that's more of what I learned, I guess, about the story, that the ambulance died on the way there. But it goes to show like the evils of the Israel Empire, and I guess that's a lot of people still don't know that story, right? Of Hind Rajab, don't know the details. I certainly didn't know all the details of it. So this does have a purpose, and I think this is also nominated for an Oscar, for example. So that winning an Oscar, being nominated, that brings up more awareness. So that's at least some good. But when we look more into the details of this film, let's look up this article. This is a review that was posted, I think, soon after a premiere at one of the festivals. Their viewpoint is that it's a tokenization of the horrors, hypocritical. They point out that the backers of this film include Brad Pitt's production company Plan B, partly financed the film, and is majority owned by Media One, a $1 billion French private equity company with ties to Zionist shareholders. In other words, any profit of the film makes will flow back in the very networks of capital that support Israel's ongoing genocide. So that really complicates the whole scenario, right? Like, the more success this movie gets, the more awareness this brings, it also funnels, money back into shareholders that support this genocide. And so it's a question of, how does art and political messaging, activism in art, how can it be beneficial in this corrupt capitalist world? Because like, in order for this movie to get made, it needed some of that funding to get this visibility. This is becoming more visible than other Palestinian movies. But this one, there were some shorts that were made about this story, Hind Rajab, but I think this is the only feature length one. So like, is this a way of co-opting that story? Are they trying to mold the narrative to make it a little bit more palatable? If we, or at least trying to minimize the culpability or, the complicity of the Israel force in the killing of Hind Rajab. Because if we go back to the film, this is something I wasn't really noticing while I was watching it, because I came to it with the knowledge of Israel is awful, and I knew I came in with already knowing the context of where this was set and everything, but the film itself doesn't really point to Israel as much. They've used the term army, like the army is in the area. They quarantine the zone or whatever. They cut off entry, and they named Israel a couple times, but it's not as upfront about it as you would think, right? So it feels like there may have been some kind of control over like how much we address or talk about Israel as the culprit, or emphasize their responsibility. You could interpret it as maybe it was an accidental shooting. We don't get the perspective on the ground. We get this perspective from here. There's no naming. And by the way, we are going to go more into spoilers a bit. Of course, I don't think even if you're going to see this movie or not, I don't think it matters too much to be spoiled, because it is a real story. And you should probably be aware of the story, regardless of, I don't think you should go into this movie not knowing the story. But you should be aware of the story, even if you don't watch it, right? So, we see this real footage and stuff, and they don't really name names. They don't go into like who was the military commanders responsible for this. It's kind of left to you. 355 bullets hit Hamada's family car. Even here, I don't think, do they even name Israel here? Okay, here they do. Until the Israel army withdrew. Right. But I think it's kind of framed as like not completely intentional. But when I watched this, I mean, to me, it was clear that it was intentional. That it wasn't like an accidental thing, because the collateral of war, they thought they were like, the excuse, of course, like, they thought they were Hamas or something, So like, but it was pretty clear, the reporting is pretty clear that any commander would have seen that there was a family in there with children, there was no confusing them for quote unquote terrorists or whatever. And also the ambulance, like, why would they shoot the ambulance? So I think it's like the movie isn't as harsh or critical as it could be, and it seems like it plays it a little safe in that way, and then maybe that's why it's backed by a certain plan B in potentially Zionist connected producers, to kind of like water down the story, to like co-opt the story and make sure they have a say in it, versus it being produced and financed by some other group or something, or it being more independent. Now, some of this is a little bit speculative, but that's what you could read it as. And I guess another thing, the main thing is that like it would have been like it feels like they left out the rest of the story, particularly Michael Moore is a producer, Joaquin Phoenix, Brad Pitt. What's interesting too, I mean, before we get to more of the aftermath, I guess like filmmaking wise, I think this is probably one of the most interesting scenes film of this story of this film, because it mixes the documentary footage with the dramatized footage, right? Which is an interesting technique I haven't really seen before, right? Showcasing within the phone the documentary footage, and matching it to this. And I thought that was effective in showing, like, reminding the viewer, like, this is real, this is what happened, But again, it kind of feels a little shy on the details. Let's go to this other article. That names here. Let's see, where is it? Like, they could have ended with naming the people responsible, right? Here's an article from Al Jazeera. The overall commander of the tanks present during the family's killing was Colonel Benny Aharon of Israel's 401 Armored Brigade. Colonel Aharon is already the subject of a criminal complaint at the International Criminal Court filed by the Hind Rajab Foundation, which uses social media footage captured by Israeli soldiers during Operation Gaza as a basis for war crime prosecutions. Investigations by the foundation have identified that within the 401st Brigade, the company known as Vampire Empire, what a creepy name, right? Under the command of Major Sean Glass, was directly responsible for killing the Rajab family and subsequently tampering with the crime scene. The Vampire Empire Company, its English name suggesting a multinational composition, is part of the 52nd Armored Battalion under command of Colonel Daniel Ella, who the foundation alleges bears direct responsibility for the killing at the field level. So those three names, they could have put that in the end credits. They could have talked about the Vampire Empire, a little more. Like, it feels like they left out a lot of that. Maybe a little bit scared. Maybe scared of defamation suit or something from Israel. I don't know, but there's reporting they can back it up with, as we saw there. And then of course, those are the people who need to be tried in criminal court, in addition to, of course, Netanyahu and everybody else in high up in the government there, including the complicit people of the U.S. government. But anyways, like, it feels like the film was a little bit lacking in that context. And then, to some, it does feel a little bit exploitative, because who is this serving at the end of the day? There is I got this information mostly from Samantha Youssef. She has this post more about it, and she goes more into like the campaigning, also the Oscar campaigning, and how like that's mostly about how the Oscar campaigning of this film and other films are kind of like a political campaign, right? In that they're trying to construct this narrative for the sake of appealing to the voters through, left-leaning politics of the film, to gain votes, and it's really more concerned about promoting the film than it is about the subjects of the film, right? And then she did a podcast with that I watched the other day. With Dr. Jared Ball. Maybe I can find it, but they go more into it. Wait a second. I'm getting the link real quick. but yeah, they discuss it more on this show. They call it a disturbing masterclass in propaganda. Now, I feel like I'm a little bit more lenient to the movie and maybe the director. I feel like their intentions probably aren't as insidious as maybe they point out in this show, in this podcast here. And I think it's more just an illustration of the compromises maybe artists have to go through in order to get their story out, and just the complications of getting a story out to build awareness within the Hollywood system that emphasizes awards, emphasizes the publicity for a movie to gain its profit back, right? Get a profit over the story, and that's over the real victims of this tragedy. And perhaps unlike a movie like No Other Land, which the documentary that won last year, that was made by Palestinian and Israeli filmmakers, that I think those funds contribute more towards the actual people involved, while this one feels like it's being again co-opted, and maybe the money that is being made is going more towards the artist and Plan B and such as other financiers who aren't really doing much for the cause against occupation or to end the genocide. So it does color my reaction a little bit, like learning all that about the movie, and it's just, again, it's just representative of the compromised position these stories are put into, are co-opted and or have to deal with in order for these stories to get across to the larger audience. And the thing is that, like, is there a positive or a net positive outcome to this, right? Is it worth it at the end of the day for potential Zionists to profit from the story, if that also means that more people are aware of this particular story, or if it adds to the overall zeitgeist or the overall awareness in people. Because the more that we see this, the more that these stories are put in front of people's eyes, you would think the more it would gravitate towards some actual material change, right? Last year's No Other Land didn't really seem to have much impact. Will 2 Oscars back to back going to a Palestinian film, a film about Palestinian oppression and stories about their struggle for liberation, 2 Oscars back to back about that, is that going to move the needle? At this point, is it already too late? So it's like, it's a bigger question of art and cinema. And at this point, it's like, really, you could also just look at this as more as art being, again, a reflection of our times, and not necessarily a meaningful call to action or a meaningful part of the solution. It's just a small part of the solution. And maybe one side, maybe spending too much time critiquing the benefits of a piece of art like this isn't as overall beneficial to the overall cause. Maybe we should at least acknowledge the problems with it within the system, of course, applaud aspects of it, but put our major focus more on material things we can do, like mutual aid, like the flotilla that that we sending mutual aid through the flotilla to Palestine, pressuring people in power to do more. I mean, continuing to support protest people, like the people who are in detention camps right now in the U.S. because of their past that we talked about already, like Lakaya Cordia, So I don't know. So that's just the world we live in right now. I don't know what else to say about that, really. But yeah, like, again, if you don't know the story, could be a good starting point to learn about that story. But I think at this point, we all know the horrors and how horrible Israel / the U.S. is. So to what extent that the movie Voice of Hind Rajab is gonna be a net positive, I don't know. We'll see if it does win the Oscars next week, or if that's gonna be something that's gonna at least affect the culture or not, moving forward. Because it really, in a way, like, I feel like in general, movies are a reflection of the culture and they can affect culture, but culture is only a stepping stone into affecting real physical change, That's what really art has always been about, Anyways, what are your thoughts? What do you think about the whole thing? Let me know. I have been watching some other stuff. That's the movie that really had me contemplating the art of cinema and the purpose of cinema more than others. But I'm continuing. I'm getting closer to completing my movies of 2025 list. Pretty much, I think maybe there's a couple more films that I might watch before I do my favorites. Which next week will probably be that. That will probably be the show next week, just going over my favorites of the year, 2025. But I did watch, let's see. I did watch Caught by the Tides. Caught by the Tides is, I guess it came out 2024, but I think it was released in the US theatrically 2025. So I think that counts as, when I make these lists, especially for like critics lists and Oscar lists, they're always like, as long as it's released within the calendar year, within your territory, you can count it as coming out this year, pretty much. But yeah, this one is by Jia Zhangke. And he's an interesting filmmaker. I haven't watched many of his films. I only watched Ash is the Purest White, which is kind of a gangster movie, which I thought was good. And I might have, it's definitely more engaging, entertaining than Caught by the Tides. the things that Caught by Tides is kind of like a culmination film, almost like a meta film about Jia's career. And Jia was an underground filmmaker in China, and was doing like his films like Pickpocket and Platform and Unknown Pleasures. Some of these images actually are repurposed for this film, Caught by Tides. So these were done underground, but then later he did more legitimate stuff later on. And so, because there's certain I guess restrictions with the Chinese government making, approving of the films you make there, right? Which is a whole thing that I might get into, that it's complicated. The idea that a socialist country that you can also consider China as being state capitalist, again, that's another thing. But socialist countries, because they have to, they're part of this bigger imperialist capitalist world. They have to, they have to keep a state that keeps out any fascistic, saboteurs in check, from foreign states, because as we know, the U.S. has actively in history tried to destabilize countries, and particularly countries that have elected, socialist leaders. They tend to destabilize and fund rebels to coup d'etats and to take over and establish more friendly authoritarian leaders, more friendly to the U.S. And so, whether it's since the Soviet Union or until now, these states have had to respond with certain authoritarian measures to maintain their sovereignty. So, in that, trickles down and influences future governments in that country, and such in China, that can be perceived, or in certain ways is restrictive in certain ways to free speech of the people, right? And so, again, that's more complicated, but I feel like Jia here has been a pivotal figure in the film industry there, trying to combat any of those restrictions. And I'm very much interested to see more of his works to understand his perspective, because he pretty much, particularly in this film, he goes over the rapid changes from the 70s and 90s, which is basically when China introduced more free market reforms to allow more capitalist aspects to their, economy. A combination of a socialist and capitalist markets. And so it was a big change, right? And so it's interesting to see from the perspective of a Chinese filmmaker, to see that change on film. So, and if you've seen these films, you would probably get more out of this one, which is something that I didn't do. I just watched this because it was on like a top list of the films of list of 2025. I was like, oh, I should watch this. Sounds interesting. But it's kind of not as engaging because I'm not as familiar with his film work. So some of these references to his other movies and just the whole narrative didn't land with me as much. And so I also, feel like I'm not as qualified to talk about this movie in particular. But from what I saw, my understanding, it is like a fascinating peek into the history of contemporary China, you know, a look at the people there. Like, you know, it's a lot of it feels documentary. I think a lot of it is documentary footage from some of his films, because he like combines footage from a lot of his films as he's trying to create a larger narrative of this woman who breaks up with her boyfriend, and then like he goes off and she goes to find him, and then it's basically kind of like a sort of love story, but it's all told in like a very like fly on the wall type of the way, with there's little dialogue. You know, it almost sometimes it acts like a silent film, even having these interstitials where we have them texting to each other, or she's at least texting to him, trying to find him. And so, you know, as someone who hasn't lived in China or is unaware about the people there, the country there as much, right? It's nice to see this perspective. You know, it's like, okay, it's a little bit of educational experience through art in that way, abstractly, of course, and not easy enough to interpret. You know, especially if you're not aware of the goings-ons and the politics there, but it's at least a sort of introduction to that, maybe. But as a film, it doesn't quite feel as cohesive, at least from my perspective as someone who hasn't watched all his films. And I don't think it's going to be as engaging to a lot of folk as maybe his other films. So it's kind of like maybe a movie you would want to watch only after you enjoyed his other films first, right? But it's not a badly made movie. And again, it's something to recommend if you're interested in his body of work. I'm not going to go too much more into it than that. But he's definitely a filmmaker to look out for, because I feel like he's still got some more left in him. Yeah. And then I watched another film, not this one, The Mastermind, Kelly Reichardt. Here's another filmmaker that's kind of like has that more of a slow pace to their filmmaking. That's another thing. Like it's not going to be appealing to a lot of people, you know, either Caught by the Tides or this one, because it has that more slow, ponderous style to it. But this one, out of all of Reichardt's film, might be the most accessible one. It's definitely the highest rated one according to Letterboxd. But I feel like it's a little bit perhaps limited in its overall theme or messaging, maybe compared to her other films. I mean, I like most of her films. I haven't watched all of them. You know, her first one I watched was Wendy and Lucy. This is a nice one. A girl and her dog, pretty much. Night Moves was interesting. I think Night Moves was like about these environmentalist radicals. Yeah, that was interesting. But planning to explode a dam. My favorites were probably these two, Meek's Cutoff and First Cow. I think her style lends itself well to Western in big frontier movies. This is pretty much like the Oregon Trail game, but like made into a movie. And mostly from the perspective of these women. But I thought this was one of my preferred movies of hers. Again, it has that slow pace, but like the way she does it, I tend to like it because it feels really it feels immersive to me. Like I can ease into it. It's a good like sit down, like it's a good sit, you know, like it's not like I wouldn't say it's boring or anything. It's more like it's like a soft massage into a world, you know, that one, you know, if you get onto its wavelength, you can ride it really well, you know. That one's good. First Cow, I think, might be my favorite one of hers. Again, also kind of a bit of a Western vibes. Has a more centered plot about this guy trying to steal a milk cow from a wealthy landowner. That was a recent one. But then this one, you know, the premise is definitely more captivating. Perhaps it follows this thief pretty much, right? He's the mastermind, who his big thing is that he's planning a heist sort of at a museum, and it's in the 70s, based in the 70s. Let's get this situated. So the aesthetics of it are well done. It does feel very 70s. It's a very good job with the you know, the costuming and the sets and even, you know, all the stylings of the hair, etc. And in the grainy film of it all, right? So that does a really good job of that. And it definitely starts off really engaging, you know, as he's planning to do this heist. But overall, the movie is pretty much a story we've seen before, right? It's a story of a man who is trying to provide for his family in a perhaps selfish, self-centered way, and in a way that is perhaps you might consider lacking of a particular work ethic and more focused on doing a big, you know, a big heist, you know, instead of like going through the normal, you know, the quote unquote normal way of making a living. And you know, so it's kind of, you know, it's reminiscent of, you know, of Breaking Bad, of, you know, Walter White type of story of the man feeling that pressure. And so this is what he ends up doing. He turns to crime to maintain his middle class lifestyle, and exposing his really individualistic, self-centered ideology and personal and worldview, where he doesn't really care so much about, you know, the people he hires to help him with it. You know, it's all about him, and then he also kind of ropes his wife into helping out. And then it kind of just illustrates the downfall and the failures of this type of personality, this type of person, you know, as he's becomes increasingly isolated, you know, as the story goes on. And so that's pretty much the theme of it. I don't think it says much more than that. It's pretty, you know, it's a well done film in that regards, but I feel like maybe it doesn't say much more, and it doesn't feel like it adds too much to that type of story that we've seen, right? Not that it has to, but it doesn't quite stand out as like, you know, as a heist film. It doesn't quite stand out as a you know, isolated man narrative as other works we've seen before. So it's kind of like just, you know, a decent good movie that, you know, stylistically stands apart from, you know, mainstream filmmaking, the pacing and all of it. And it's really like held up by the performance really of Josh O'Connor, who we've seen in recently in The Challengers, which I really liked. He was in some other stuff too. What was he in? He was in some other movie, right? Oh yeah, he was in Wake Up Dead Man. I like that was the Ryan Johnson movie on Netflix. I think he did a good job in that one as a priest. That one was more interesting, kind of. But that was a whole different genre. But anyways, this, you know, it was an okay movie. I don't know. Should we go into spoilers for this? I'm gonna go into a little bit of spoilers here. So we're gonna just get into the ending because I think the ending is kind of demonstrates the main point of the film, I guess. So here we go into spoilers. Actually, kind of reminiscent of Caught by the Tides. It kind of ends in a similar way of, which we'll get into. So spoilers for both, I guess. So yeah, he basically ends up having to go on the run, right? And this also kind of demonstrates the masculine versus feminine viewpoint of the world, and how he feels like, you know, he's doing this for the family, you know, but really he's doing this for himself because he can't bring himself to do something less self-centered, more, you know, and more, I guess, more moral, more legitimate, I guess, and, you know, because really it's not like he's impoverished. He's comes from a, you know, it's not like he does this as a last resort. You know, it's more of adventurous for him. He comes from a wealthy family. Like his family, his father is a judge, right? And that's how he gets away with it for so long. Like he's able to get out of the interrogation from the cops because he's like, oh yeah, my father's a judge, let me call him. You know, so he has all this privilege, you know, and yet he chooses to go this route of becoming this thief of the museum, you know. And it's like a museum too. It's not like he's stealing from the rich or anything. So again, it's like just representative of his egocentrism. And, you know, this scene with his friend here, like she sees him for who he is. You know, her husband is like more fascinated with the cool story of like, oh, my friend has this cool story. He stole these paintings or whatever. But she sees him that like she sees right through him. It's like, no, you know, this is all selfish. You're not really concerned about your family, really, and you're gonna bring more hurt to my family. So you better get out of here. So, you know, so he ends up becoming even more isolated. He doesn't, you know, he even has this conversation here with his friend about like his friend's like, oh, you should go to this commune. That's a good place to hide out, you know. If there's some feminists there's other activists, you know, that would be a good place. But then, you know, the main character here is like, nah, that's not for me, you know. So this goes to show like he had this opportunity to get out, to have some safety with a community, but he rejects that. Again, he's focusing on himself. Again, he rejects his family. He rejects, you know, like working together with family. Like I feel like, you know, there's a reading that like his wife was helped him and was part of the heist. But to me, my reading of the story is that he kind of manipulated his wife into helping him by making like the pillowcases, by helping him plan, like, you know, when he went the first scene where he stole a little figure and she hid it in her purse, like, you know, she probably felt like she had to do this because of the patriarchal power system, you know. He in particularly in the 70s, of course, but it still applies today. But you know, she felt, you know, she felt pressured into it, and it doesn't go too much into it. It would have been nice if we got more of her perspective, because you kind of have to assume a lot of things too. Even the moment where he like has to like show like there's these mobsters who kidnap him and I guess we have to assume he tells them where the paintings are, and that's how he loses the paintings he stole, and now he's on his own over here. So like some of these things are kind of skipped about, but so you kind of infer what's going on sometimes. But that's my feeling, my interpretation of it. And so yeah, it's all about him, right? And so again, he rejects the commune because that's antithetical to his way of his worldview. But what happens is that he ends up symbolically co-opting collectivism for his benefits. This is a moment where he sinks the lowest. He steals from an old lady her purse and gets the money so he can buy a ticket out the bus out. Presumably he's going out of the country. He like found a passport in someone's jacket that was left behind in a hotel, and he put his picture there, so he forged a passport. So he's presumably about to leave to Canada, maybe to the commune, maybe. So maybe there was a chance that he's able to rehabilitate himself if he were able to join the commune and find happiness and an enlightenment with a community. That could have been his salvation. But his downfall is that he's so selfish at this point. He steals from this old woman, and then he gets into this peaceful protest against the war in Vietnam. This is the 70s, to hide among the crowd, taking advantage almost parasitically from the people, but not providing for anybody but himself. With the excuse being that he needs to be the sole provider of his family, while of course his wife is doing, is working at this office job. But then he gets captured by the police. They assume he's part of the protest. By the way, it's a violent crackdown on the protest. They're just something that continues to happen today, of course. We get the police killing people, or at least hurting people, and he gets swept up, and then it ends there. And we are to assume that he's captured, and they identify him because he's on the run, of course, and he's probably jailed, for a considerable amount of time, because of stealing those art pieces from the museum. So that's kind of the story. So I think that's what it's saying, right? Saying that this is the folly of this man who has to potentially, has to struggle in this world, perhaps not overtly stated in the film, but in this capitalist world, right? And so, but he chooses the wrong way, and perhaps you could interpret it yourself as like he's coerced by society into doing crime, but he uses his privilege, to get away with it, and is able to to get away with as much as he could, and is able to focus on himself and not his family or anybody else. And his comeuppance is that he's caught at the end, and I think we've kind of seen that story again. I mean, most recently, or most obvious, I guess, is Breaking Bad. But we've seen that other elements too. I mean, it ties back to like maybe like a story like The Godfather, for example, or something. just the toxic masculinity of it all, you know. And what was I gonna say? So yeah, so like I don't know, like it's kind of just. Oh, also there's this scene here I forgot. Like this is a good example of the type of pacing this movie has. It shows him bring up all these paintings, and it spends like several minutes here. And like in a way, it's like it's nice to see exactly what he's going through, like the exact struggle of him lifting the paintings. The ladder falls, he has to jump down. So this whole time you're thinking, oh shit, he's gonna fall. So it does build this tension, but to what end? Just to build a little atmosphere and to like kind of put you in his shoes a little more. I don't know if it was super necessary, but again, that might take off some more people than others, whether or not they want to sit there watching him climb up this ladder several times to put the paintings up there, you know. So, and that I guess you can expand that to the rest of the film. Like, is it worth it to spend so much time with him, you know? And again, because of the performance, like if it was like a much lesser actor or performance, this would not have worked at all, I think, this movie. Because overall the plot and the story is a little bit light, you know. So yeah, that's The Mastermind. It was an okay movie. But that's what I've been watching this last week. That's what's been on my screen. Let me know what you've been thinking about. If you watch this stuff, what's been on your screen. And yeah, next time will probably be best of my favorites of 2025. I'm wondering if I should do. I was thinking of doing a separate video, like doing just to, because that's what I usually do. But now that I'm on this format of just like doing a big long recording without editing it, I think we'll just do the usual thing. We'll go over what's been happening on the newsfeed, and then just do a best of list. Probably include some TV shows and then movies. And then hopefully I'll get that out and done before the Oscars, which I do like to watch, even, you know, it's problematic, of course, but I probably will give my commentary on that the following week. And maybe then I'll slow down. I said I was gonna take a break last time, but maybe then, because pretty much I've had at least a couple movies to talk about each week, because I've been trying to watch all the movies for my favorite of list. But usually what happens is that after like spending a month or so watching a bunch of movies, I get overwhelmed and burnt out, and then I just end up watching less movies the next month. So that might be a thing, but there's TV shows too to talk about. I'm sure there's going to be a TV show coming out soon that I want to talk about. Anyways, we'll see. We'll see. We will see how it goes. But yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.